Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. David Fieldman is a Director of Governance and Consulting at the Edmonton Chamber of Volunteer Organizations. His portfolio includes the governance development of the non-profit sector in Edmonton and the greater region. David holds a BSc Mathematical Science with a psychology minor, MA, and interdisciplinary studies. Thesis explored the collective cognition of interdisciplinary teams. Got to write this down. A PMP project management professional and a QMED qualified mediator. Thank God I don't have to read that often.
Yeah.
That's a long title. Thank you very much for coming and presenting to us. We all look forward to hearing.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so the official start. I carry too many designations, but my interest is in how teams and people, groups of people think and behave together. And that kind of gives you a sense of why I'm the one up here today. So it's not just, okay, so you're in a room, but it's how do we get the right people? What does that look like? What is conflict? How do we explore all those questions? I'm hoping that if you have questions, you're gonna ask them as we go and not wait till the end. It's much easier to expand and explore on a slide than it is to kind of sum that up at the end, but I'll have space for questions at the end depending on how much time we take. Before we can talk about building the board you're ready for, we really need to talk about you. And so let's start there. I'm gonna talk about diversity, but I'm probably gonna use a lens of diversity that you're not used to. So this model of diversity actually comes from the world of conflict management. It's not the ethnocultural lens, it's not the religious lens, it's when we have conflict with people, how do we understand the differences between them and where they come from to understand how they think? And so here there are three pieces. And I really want you to reflect on these because this is going to be important as we go through today. I have social diversity. These are the labels I wear. These are the labels I both give myself and that you give me. I have information diversity. This is my knowledge and how I've interpreted it. And then I have value diversity. These are my motivational values, the actual values that drive my behavior every day. And what's interesting is when we look at conflict and how people behave and how they think, these are the three pieces that tell us a lot. And yet when we go about recruiting, we tend to think about them very differently and we tend to get mixed up in them. So you're at the center of this. If I put all information that was out there in one circle, all of the possible values in the other, right? And all of the labels, you're somewhere in this beautiful sweet spot. And so is everybody else you meet. But all of us are in unique places. We all had different parents and different grandparents. We grew up in different houses in different communities. We went to different schools. Different things shaped us into who we are today. So here we are, but how does that play out? That's the important piece. And that's what I want you to think about as we move. So the Venn diagram is nice to say, hey, here's the collection, here's where you can be. But the truth is, this is more accurate representation of who you are and how you think and how you behave. So I'm gonna explain them all quickly and then I'll explain why I've moved to this circle model instead. Social diversity. This is labels, and I mentioned that earlier. What do I mean by labels? When I stand up here and you see me, you see a white male of a certain age with facial hair, holding his technology in his hand, wearing a suit, and that gives you an interpretation of who I am, those kind of pieces. One company played on this really well in the early 2000s. And that was Apple. Apple came out with one of the best music players in the world. A few $100 device that we put in our pockets. Fantastic music quality. And yet, what did we all do? We wore incredibly cheap white earbuds to listen to that music. And why do we do that? Because it told other people that we were iPod users. I'm hip, I'm creative. I'm like the other creatives that use Apple products. They did this with their laptops. They were the first company that when you opened your laptop, the logo was the right side up facing out to everybody else. But when it was closed facing you, it was upside down. The logo wasn't for me. It was to tell the people around me, this is my label. I'm an Apple user. What does that mean about me? Well, it means I'm creative. I'm innovative. I like to do artistic things. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But that's the label that I was putting on myself. We see this all the time. Anybody here have a dog? Out of curiosity? What happens when you pass another dog walker while you're walking your dog? You nod, you say hello, they're like you. They're another dog owner. Right? Cyclists, runners, smartwatch wearers, the category goes on and on. And so that's the label. That's the first thing we see about somebody. Next is our information diversity. This is what I've learned compared to you. This is my knowledge. The example I love to put here is the difference between an engineer and an urban planner when it comes to building roads. Engineers, traditionally, are taught about flow. This is how much water you need to go through a pipe. This is how big your storm drain needs to be to handle the storms. This is how big we make it. We build roads the same way. We expect the Anthony Henday to take so many cars in the morning, and therefore to handle this traffic, it needs to be so many lanes wide. And so we build it that way. Urban planners are taught differently about how to build roads. They're taught that when you build roads with high flow, they fill up because people move and change where they live based on those traffic availability patterns. So I remember living in the West End when the Anthony Henday was first built. It was wonderful to get to the south side. I could travel the city incredibly fast. What's happened? Everybody else thought the same thing. We have suburbs on the other side of the Anthony Henday. Avoid the Anthony Henday. What are we doing now? We're widening the Anthony Henday. In 10 years, will that actually help us? Probably not, because since it's going to be a good road, more houses will be built and more people will need to take the Anthony Henday. And so that's a comparison of the two groups that are taught differently about how to do the same thing. That's their information diversity. And lastly, it's our values diversity. Values are the motivational values. These are the things that really drive who you are and how you behave. They're the things that drive what you do when nobody's looking at a deep root. The problem with them is if I was to ask you your values, you probably actually wouldn't be able to articulate them to me. You'd be able to tell me what you think your grandparents and your parents' values are, because that's what we wear. You'd be able to tell us what society's values thinks that should be a big deal right now. But who you really are doesn't really come into your view until they're challenged. We like to think of our top, say, 5 values as this horizontal line where they're all even. These are my 5 principles that I don't bend on. But that's not accurate, because what happens when you're in a situation when those 2 principles are in conflict? I love to share this story about my brother. I'm going to be mindful since I'm being recorded today about it, but that's okay. He's used to me telling this story all the time. When my younger brother finished school, he was kind of in this, do I do what I was trained to do? I finished education, is that what I want to go do? Or do I want to go do something else? And we ended up doing a value exercise together. And in this exercise, you kind of look at 2 values and you figure which one actually, when they're in conflict, is your priority to help you kind of figure out what you want to do in life. And so he had a whole bunch of values already on the table, and things like family and tradition and conformity and belonging, and all those pieces were up there. And then creativity came out. And he grabbed the creativity card, moved it to the top, and said, oh yeah, creativity is a really big deal. I value creativity. I'm 100% for creativity. And I'm like, hands off my cards. First of all, these are mine, not yours, no touch. Second of all, I know you better, so we're going to do this properly. We put it in the middle. We say, is it more important or less than this one? We move up halfway, and so forth. And finally, we get to creativity versus tradition. And my brother goes, Dave, by the way, he's the only person I let call me Dave. Dave, creativity is way more important than tradition. We have no traditions. You're right. Religiously, we don't really have those traditions. Culturally, we don't really have those traditions. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about where you have traditions. So you're a basketball coach. Let's pretend I'm an amazing basketball player. But I've got a bad wrist, so I can't do that traditional shot. Will you teach me a different way to shoot the basketball? Well, no. That's how you shoot the basketball. In basketball, that's what you have to do. But wait a second. You just told me creativity was more important than nutrition. Well, everything else it is, but not in basketball. And so what happens is when we compare our values, we don't compare them in places where they're both triggered. We say, oh yeah, in 90% of my life, creativity is more important than tradition, therefore creativity wins. But that's not how it works. It's when you're in a space where those two are actually an attention point. And that's what we don't understand well. So when it comes to the world, this is us, my values are my core. I see the world from the inside out. I judge others from my inside out. I put my values onto them, my information onto them, and then my labels and their labels. But that's not how others are judged, because we see them the other way around. I see your labels first. I see your social identity first. I don't know your values for a very long time. So I'm on a board who's looking for more diversity. What do I start doing? I look for people who have a different skin color than me. I look for people who have a different religion, because that's diversity. And I remember working with a board where they're like, yeah, we're diverse. We have, here's our Chinese, here's our Muslim, here's our, and it's like, hold on a second. All of these are like third generation Canadians. They came here a very long time, they've integrated, right? Are they actually that diverse? Well, on the social lens, yes. But on the information lens, I don't know, right? And really, not even on the social lens, on which social lens? Because they still carry most of the same labels you do. What does that mean? And so how do we think about it? And so our goal is to look past that when we're recruiting, when we're seeing people, and many other things, right? And it takes a long time for us to be able to move into that inner core, to really understand them. So what does this have to do with recruitment is going to be the big piece we'll talk about. And that's because fit matters. So I want to talk about 3 types of fit. These are the big piece. So organizational fit, team fit, and role fit. And no, I'm not giving you all the slides ahead of time. I'm giving you just enough to work off of. So organizational fit. Shared vision, shared values, and shared organization, social identity. That's organizational fit. So I talked briefly about values. Here's the image for it. This is the Schwartz theory of universal values. It's often displayed in a circle model. This is kind of it broken out even bigger. I know the yellow one's really hard to read, and I apologize for that. The way it's meant to look and be designed is that things that are across each other from the middle are actually values that oppose each other. They technically do not work well together at all. Somebody who values power and wealth and authority probably doesn't get along very well or doesn't align from a value perspective with somebody who believes in equality, right? Everybody being equal, social justice, those kind of pieces. What does that look like? And do we know what our values are as our organization? So before we go to recruit, we need to know what the values that we stand on as our organization are so that we're recruiting board members that are the right fit. So let's talk in the community league context. We went out and held a larger engagement piece where we explored the values of our community and what kind of community we want to be. And then we went and recorded board members to help that agreed with us in the values of what our community was. Because this isn't my values. I'm not looking for people who share my values. I'm looking for people who share my organization's values. And there's a difference. I can walk into a meeting with my set, as long as mine aren't in full conflict, and say, yes, this is my priority, this is how I sit, but I'm voting as a board member on behalf of our community. And mine don't contradict yours, but they're not exactly the same as yours. I vote in this set, and I'm looking for people who can vote in this set. So a really good example that I like to use is food banks across this country, because intake at every food bank is completely different. Some of them believe that if you're desperate enough to ask for help, you need help, we help you. Because that's our checks and balance. And yes, if we had 10% fraud rate, whatever, it costs us more to go through everybody and double check. Others believe we only help those who truly need it. So we ask for your bank statements and your financial records and where you live before we help you. Both are there to help you, but their values on who we help and how we help are very different. Some believe that I'm a hand up. Some believe I'm a handout. Some are, I will help you once and that's it. Others are, I will help you every week until you get back on your feet. Those are different values. And so that's a conflict that you don't want on your board level. Does that, okay. So 2 quick videos. A little politically sensitive, so I'm just putting that caveat out there. These are about 1-minute captions each, taken from news releases last week. I believe it was last week.
Just getting over it.
Not the election. This was slightly before the election. We're not over this one yet. So. Ready for this?
In the IPCC SR 1.5 report that was released last year, it says that if we are to have a 67% chance of limiting the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees, we had on January 1st, 2018, 420 gigatons of carbon dioxide left in our CO2 budget. And now that number is down to less than 360 gigatons, as we emit 42 gigatons of CO2 every year if you include land use. At current emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget is gone within less than 8.5 years. Again, that budget is for a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise and avoiding the risk of setting off several irreversible chain reactions beyond human control that would lead to enormous sufferings for countless of people, especially among indigenous communities and people in the global south.
Now, folks, Albertans and Canadians are practical people. They like real-world solutions. And calling for the end of the modern industrial economy, advocating to put millions of people out of work, putting out of work our First Nations contractors and Indigenous people who work at plants like this, telling us that we have to shut down all of the airplanes in every car and stop powering the cell phones and stop heating our homes in the winter is not a real-world solution.
So, 2 sets of values, talking about the same issue. Our society, our future. I chose those clips because they're both talking about our Indigenous communities and their future and their health, but very, very different statements, right? And so that's the piece I wanted to kind of showcase that, because same thing, supposedly, good future. That's what we're talking about. But how we do that and what that future looks like are completely different things. Oh, sorry. There we go. So that's the values piece. How do we figure out the values of somebody we want to work with? But we have to first start with our own, so we're recruiting the right ones. Next is vision. When we think about the future of our community, are we thinking about the same thing? I used to live in Pat Heights, Quesnel, Rio Terrace area. And while I was there, the infill debate, sensitive topic, sorry, became a really big deal. But the example I want to use for that neighborhood is actually something even earlier than that. The Jewish Community Center, the JCC, the rec center, used to be in that area. It had been there for a very long time. It definitely didn't have the love put into it that it needed. There was talk about revitalizing it, but part of the money to revitalize it was also to build a seniors residence on that site. It was going to be a Jewish seniors residence, not that it wasn't open to everybody, but that way it would have a kosher kitchen to accommodate that community that used to live in that area, still lives very close. But there was a lot of fighting from the community to say we didn't want to increase in traffic and we don't want this high rise that's going to obstruct our view. And so that was a set of values. Whereas the other people fighting against it were, but wait a second, I can't continue to live in this house forever. And I don't want to have to move out of my neighborhood in order to live in a place that I can afford, like that I can actually survive in. Those are 2 conflicting sets as well. And so what does that look like? What do we want to be as a community is the question that the board should be asking, exploring, figuring out, and then aligning around. And part of that work is every so many years, checking out, do we have the same vision? So what do you see? Do we all have the same vision? We're all looking at the same image. Anybody? A bunch of you have seen this already, so don't cheat for me. Young or old? Young woman? Is that what everybody sees? Okay. Yeah, most people, you can't see both at the same time. You can flip, your brain can flip between them. Does anybody not see the young woman? Okay. Does anybody not see the old woman? Okay. So, young woman, I guess I can cheat and go like this. Highlighter. So let's start with the old one because it's easier. Here's the nose. Here's her mouth, and her chin comes down. So this would be her chin, and she's kind of tucked in and looking down. And for the young woman, her nose is right here. She's looking to the side. And this is her chin. This is a necklace. And here's her hair, her ear, with her hair and then her head covering. And so that's one of my favorite examples of, yes, we're all looking at the same image, but we're not all seeing the same thing. Do you see it? No? Which one do you not see?
No, I
Okay.
can't, but I have to focus because the old woman keeps disappearing. Yeah, the young woman. Yeah.
So that's normal. There's an image there and our brain can't see both images at the same time, right? That's completely normal. I think your comment was, I see both. Can you see them both at the exact same time? Usually it's no. I know they're both there, but I can't see them at the same time. What vision of the future do we hold? Are we all seeing the same thing? I'll show you after. This one's just for fun. It's about saying, if we have the same vision, same values, do we still see the world the same way? So what's up there? Exactly. So context is everything, right? So if that was my house number versus this was my sign, we see very different things, and yet the thing in the middle didn't change. And so the context in which we make decisions matters. Our vision, our values are part of that larger context, but so is our information. So social identity is the next piece, right? Values, shared values for the organization, not my own, shared vision for where the organization's going. And lastly, the right organizational fit. Is this somebody who can see themselves as being a member of that group? Because the last thing you want is that it's like, I'm on this board, but like, that's them. Because we're a team, right? We're part of this organization. We're all on this community board. We're all together. And so what does that look like in your organization? When I look, how do we see each other together? Team fit. Patrick Lencioni recently wrote a new book. I don't know if anybody follows him. He's a business fable writer. So he tends to write stories about the situation for half the book, and you get this cute story of somebody living through the experience and how they dealt with it. And then afterwards, he goes through the business part and deconstructs it. His new one on teams, I don't think any model is perfect, but actually I really liked his suggestions for interviewing and onboarding and looking at people that way. But he talks about, are you the right team fit? So remember, first we talked about, are you the right person for our organization? That's not for our board. That's for our organization. Should you be a volunteer here? Do your values match? What that role is, I don't know yet. But yes, you fit in with us. Now we're talking about, do you fit on the team? What does that look like? So there's 3 key pieces to the right team member. Humble. What do they mean by that? It's not, oh, no, that wasn't me. It's more of, I am more interested in the success of everybody than I am in the success of myself. Right? I'm not here because it looks good on my resume. I'm not here, and I'm not going for president because I want to be in the news because it's going to help me get my next job. Or, what are there was a joke somebody once told me of what are the steps to getting on city council? Community league, library board, school board, right? So there's this journey we make, and somewhere it has to start with, you need to be, the president or vice president of your community league to be able to run for council, because that shows you understand that your community. So what do we get? We get a whole bunch of people who put their hands up for roles, and we're desperate to fill them because nobody wants that work, who aren't there for the team. What does that look like? So am I there for my credit? Or am I there for the success of all of us? Hungry. Hungry is an interesting one. This isn't, I'm going to work 80 hours a week. This is, I'm passionate for this work and I want to see change. It's hungry within our culture. It's hungry within the capacity that I have, but I'm giving you what I want. I'm not the board member who wants to sit at the meetings but do nothing else. I want to sit at the meetings and be a good board member. And I have the capacity and the desire to do the pre-work I need to do. I'm willing to give up my Saturday to go for training to make this board better. That's hungry, right? Not the person who's never read the meeting notes ahead of time, never done any of the work, doesn't volunteer for any of the committees. I'm there to be on the board. I'm not there because I want to see the change. I'm not hungering for the better of our community or our organization. And lastly is smart. And I'm not talking about do you have the skills to do the role. I'm not talking about a role right now. So I'm not talking about are you a good bookkeeper, or are you an HR person, or are you the engineer we need because we're about to go through reconstruction. That's not it. I'm talking about do you know how to be a good member at this table? Do you know how to give space for somebody else to talk? Do you know how to not get offended anytime somebody asks a question to improve your idea? Right? Where are you when it comes to human relationships? And none of us are perfect in this. In all three, we can grow. The question is, do you have enough of all three that we can work together to make it all work? Now let's talk about role. So I'll give everybody a second. It'll repeat itself, so don't worry too much. I mentioned this earlier in our pre-conversation. This is kind of, though not a real text, it's a real conversation that I remember, where somebody joined the board that was to be the treasurer because they said we needed somebody in that seat. Don't worry, you don't have to do anything. You just have to present the finances at the meeting. And now they're like, I think I work, 60 hours a month doing the books, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So what does that look like, right? And so we've talked about, are you the right person for our organization? We've talked about, are you the right person for our board? Now we're here to talk about, are you the right person for the role we're recruiting you for? So skills and knowledge. Now when it comes to, do you have the skills to actually do this role? Right? Can you actually do it? Can you handle it? Is this what you're interested in doing? What does that look like? Time and flexibility. Am I asking you for a role that you don't actually have the time or flexibility to handle? So this is my favorite. We need you to be board chair. I understand you work 60 hours a week, but that's okay. You can do all your emails at night or all your communication, blah, blah, blah. Most board chairs I know have to take meetings somehow during the day at certain points. If you're in front of council, if you want to meet with your elected official, if something's going on, there are times where you need a little bit of flexibility. Do you have the flexibility that you need for that role? Are we recruiting for the flexibility we need for that role? Are we recruiting for the time? Now, I'm not asking every board member to have hours available to them, because then we don't have the diversity we need. That's why this is in the role fit and not in the team fit. I want that single mom of 2 children in our community to be on our board because she has a different perspective about our community and how to live those values in our community than the retired individual who was an engineer all his life, is stable, and doesn't have grandchildren. Both of them are important. How do we make our board accessible to both of them? Being on the board is different than being in a role. I might not expect all my board members to have all the time in the world to be on every committee, because that's not why they're there. Am I recruiting? Is this person going into the right role? Sometimes it's okay if not every board member is on a committee because they're not there to be on committees. They're there to carry a set of values and to represent and see the world differently in our vision and values for our organization to move forward. Lastly, are they actually interested in doing the work we're asking them to do? How many times do we arm twist somebody into being the treasurer or the secretary? Right? We arm twisted the secretary. This one. We arm twist the secretary to take there, and then we wonder why the minutes don't come out until 5 minutes before the next meeting.
Classic.
Well, I hate taking minutes. Why did you ask me to take the minutes? This isn't what I enjoy doing, and yet I'm here. Right? So how many people are in the room going, yeah, that's me, right? So few hands. I've lived it. I've been there. Hey, you know policy. Will you be on our board and do all our policy stuff? I do this all day at work. I don't really want to do this in the evenings. I'm sorry, right? That's not what I enjoy. So that's why we say this is about recruiting the board members you're ready for. Because what happens is your board is lucky. But it's usually the other way around, is we're so desperate for people that we grab them, and then we can perpetuate this problem. And sometimes we almost need that Phoenix kind of effect where, okay, we burn down to 4 people. And we all put our heart and soul into this, and it sucks for a little while. but we're going to get it to an area where people hear about our community league different, and we want to be a part of it. So I have this kind of conversation on all boards I talk to all the time, and it's really interesting. You know, I'm having a conversation with some of the FCSS, Family Community Support Service Liaison people, and they're like, so it seems like you guys have a really easy time recruiting for this board. What is that? Why is that? And it's like, well, first of all, we're recruiting these types of people. We're a good board to be on if you're in that kind of work. We have a reputation of being a high-functioning board. We're known for the kind of vision and the conversations. Our board meetings and our structure of our board meetings and the amount of time they are and when they are is appropriate to the demographic that we're trying to entice, right? And we have a strong chair and we invest in this space. And so people see this as a place they want to be because they get to come and think about bigger issues and have conversations. And when they take on committee work and administrative work, they take on the committee administrative work they want to do because they see that, right? Rather than we need to pull somebody else into that. So I'm just gonna move to my next slide. Thank you, yeah. So there's a few pieces in that, and that's actually our next question. So that's why I'm really thankful for all the questions, because that's exactly where we are in our challenge. Is that, okay, so either my board's not functioning where I want it and I need it to grow, or my board's functioning but I can't get people in. And I think there's a few different parts to this conversation. Can you actually, yeah, it's kind of dark, but can everybody see what the image is? Yeah, it's Kermit. It's from one of the newer movies where there's a lookalike Kermit who got out of prison. So it's the dark side and the light. Thank you. And so it's not, I'm not trying to say you're all the dark side or your board sucks. What I'm trying to say is, do you actually know how you're seen by others? What does that look like? Why is it that people don't want to be on the board? So your comment was, we're high functioning, and so they don't want to kick us off. Sometimes term limits are an asset for that. I'm done now. And I'm gonna be done in a year, we need to find, and that's a different communication because, yeah, nobody wants to push me off. I remember a story of a board where one person was running for a position, and from the floor, somebody jokingly nominated their mother, and their mother won. And it went really, really bad afterwards, right? And so it's like, what does that look like? Do you allow nominations for the floor? That's a really interesting question when you're trying to build a board that's about something different than whoever got elected today, right? So how do others see you? What does that look like is a really important piece. Do you know how your community sees your board? How do we change our conversation? And I don't think it's just communities, let's be honest. Boards in general, how many people actually understand what a board does? What the 6,500 nonprofits in the Edmonton Greater Region area, do you know them all? Do you know what they do? Do you actually understand them, right? Some of them we know, some of them we have no clue, right? We probably all know less than 100, right? How many people actually understand what a board meeting should be? One of the questions I often ask is, tell me, where did you learn how to be in a meeting and how to make collective decisions and what teamwork looks like? And the story I usually use is, let's talk about school. In school, the laziest person, not the dumbest, the laziest person looks for the smartest, hardest working person that they can be paired with on a team project so that they can do the least amount of work. And the smartest person and the hardest working person looks for the person who's also going to do the most amount of work so they don't have to do it all. That's not teamwork, right? That's not the teamwork that we're talking about here on boards. You know, in one of my other talks, and I'll use it to give you context, when I talk about teams, we talk about 3 different types of teams: multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary teams. Multidisciplinary teams are like people who are building a house. They don't all come in at the same time. First, somebody comes and digs the hole, then somebody comes and pours the concrete, then somebody builds the frame, then then they do the outside, then somebody else comes and does the wiring for the electrical and the plumbing, and on and on and on and on it goes. They don't actually work together, but they all work on the same project. That's a multidisciplinary team. Interdisciplinary teams are when you need different skill sets to come together and actually work together at the same time. So I need my electrician and my plumber to actually do this job simultaneously because they're running through things together and they might have to wrap things funny, that kind of piece. But they're still working in their specialty space. The electrician is still electrician, the plumber is still a plumber. Transdisciplinary teams are where we step beyond that. Transdisciplinary teams are when we have a problem that in our current disciplines we don't have a solution for. What I'm working in is not good enough. My electrical training or your training as a plumber is not enough to solve this problem. We almost need to go and create a new way of thinking that involves both of our specialties together, right? So if you look from an academic context, nanophysics, right? Microbiology, right? We've started taking two different schools and pushing them together. Why? Because we've realized that now we're at a space where I need knowledge that isn't in my discipline, and it's about more than just working with somebody. It's about, we need to create new language. We need to create new ideas. We need to work at a different level. What is the goal of a board? It's about taking a problem that none of us alone have the skills to actually solve, holding the values and the vision of our community, and creating a solution that's better for everybody to move forward. That's our goal. But where have we ever learned that to do it that way, right? Where have we, so boards are scary, and so we move into the administrative hat in our boards because we do that every day. I do my own books, right? I clean my own house, I fix, right? I do these things. I know how to do the administrative side of board work. And so there's larger challenges in that. And then there's the challenge of, okay, so I don't even know how to be on a board. Right? What does that really look like? And my usual comment is, how do most board members know how to be on boards? Because they watched board members who were on boards, who had learned to be on boards by watching board members who were on boards, who learned to be on, right? And it goes on and on and on and on. So practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. That's the problem. And so it makes permanent in the way we think about boards. This is how I've always heard about them. The comment I hear is, oh, you joined your community league? I'm sorry. Right? I've heard that said a few times, and it's like, wait a second, you don't know which community league I joined. Mine might be an awesome board, but you've painted us all with the same brush. And you know what? All boards can be dysfunctional. Corporate boards, nonprofit boards, they've all been there, and all of them can be functional, and all of them can be amazing. But I have to be the right board for the needs of my organization right now, and I have to have the right people for the needs of my organization right now. And that's what this is about. Am I a board that needs to be more in the administrative space than the governance space? And am I hiring people and recruiting board members for the administrative space? Or am I a board that needs to be more in the policy and governance space and less in the administrative space, so I'm recruiting people for that? Or do I need to be somewhere in the middle, but then I need to know who I'm recruiting and for what role, and not hold it against them when they're in the wrong role? If we're about to go through a major capital campaign, and I brought in a whole bunch of people who have the network to bring in that capital, but they're not sitting on committees and I'm mad at them, or they're not doing their pre-work, well, maybe they shouldn't have been on the board in the first place, they should have been on the fundraising committee. But I recruited them for reason X, and I'm holding them against, right, Y. And that's the problem here, is that when I go out, I need to know who I really am and who others think I really am to be able to have that conversation. So if others think, oh, community leagues, I'm sorry, then I need to know that before I have the conversation to say, actually, you shouldn't be. This is amazing. These are the kind of conversations I get to have. This is the way I think, and this is what I'm doing to shape my community. Right? But I need to understand that first. And so, to me, it's really clear this isn't a PR exercise. Right? When you're trying to step back and look at who you are, it's really about figuring out where are you now to know where you want to go tomorrow. We're so desperate to be there that we're trying to leap. But first I have to take the first step, right? And that's what it's about. It's about finding out I am here. So I need board members who are going to get me here. What do those board members look like? And then I need board members who are going to get me here. What do they look like? And think of it as a long-term strategy. But first I need to know where I'm starting. So that comes down to, is the person that you're looking for want to be part of who you are? Are we looking for the wrong people? Right? The amount of times that, so not that long ago I was asked to be on a board, and I said, look, I'm a mediator, I work in the space of governance, I work with broken boards all the time. The nice thing about broken is it can be fixed, right? And it's not me who does the fixing, it's me who does the coaching to help you get fixed. But I don't want to do that for the board I'm on. Like, I want to join a board who's working at a certain space because I'm working in another space all day. And they're like, oh yeah, we're fantastic, everything's great, we're highly functional, everything, right? So I joined the meeting and it's like, no. What was I thinking and why did I say yes? And I was miserable the entire time, right? And I wasn't an asset to the board because I was brought on with certain promises and this is how they saw themselves. But that's not how I saw them. And so as a result, even though I had the skills and the expertise, I actually wasn't investing in that board the way I should have been because I was the wrong person in that stage of their existence. And maybe in the wrong role. Maybe I should have been brought in as a volunteer to help the board grow rather than as a board member because your hat is different, right? So if they're the person you want in 5 years, maybe they can carry a different role to help you be there in 5 years. But they probably will be miserable to be on the board today. So this is the challenge. We talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Bums and seats. That's what we really need. Our bylaws say we need 7 people. It's okay. You want me to come back? Yeah, come back. Okay. So our bylaws say we need 7 to 12 people. We're going to have 6 people. We need somebody. And so we're desperate to fill this seat. Well, you know what? Go to your membership at the next AGM and find a way to make that work. Let's have a conversation to solve that. Is it good? No. Is it long-term a solution? No. Is there a way we can make this work? Let's figure that out. But then it's like, but we don't need bums and seats. What we need is donations, or we need community support. So it's not about bums and seats. It becomes about wallets and seats. This is about an equal pay nonprofit in the US. I really liked the ad, so I wanted to include it. Good, we needed a little bit of that right now. I think we need to start a conversation about what is a community league and what am I here to do, but not what is a community league, what is our community league and what are we here to do? And so let's change that a little bit. I'm not here to do everything. I'm not here to represent this community on everything either, because the truth is, from a diversity lens, I don't represent this community. I represent a portion of it, and I do my best to hear everybody, but I don't hear everybody. So my role, this community league's role, right, not our community league, this community league's role is to help our community become like X. So our work focuses on X, this is how we do it, this is what we're working on. And the more clarity I have in that, the easier it is to do that. I think the problem is that we don't have that clarity. We want to be all things to all people. We want to be the champion of our community. We want to be the voice that the city goes to on all issues about our community. It's like, stop. That's not our role. Our role is to help our community be X. That might be so they have recreational space and so that they can be active in the communities they live in. Or it can be so they have a way to connect with their neighbors, and so we're dealing with isolation, so we have a community that's happy and healthy from a human interaction standpoint. Or it can be a safety lens. Our community league's primary concern is safety in our neighborhoods, and that's what we do right now. What does that look like, right? And so I think it's about understanding that we have this capacity. We are 12 people. The issues that we've heard from our community right now that we're working on for the next 3 to 5 years are A, B, and C, and we invest our time in A, B, and C. And if you're interested in working in D, we can either see if there's a space for you in the board to work on D, or how can the board and the community league support you, but not as part of the community league, right? So if it's about connecting you with our local councillor, we have that relationship. We can do that for you, but you're not doing that through us, because that's not what the community has told us we're investing our energy in, right? It's about being clear on that of, this is where we stand right now, this is what we've heard from our community of what we're trying to make, and this is our path in making it move forward. Does that help? Yes. Perfect. So, just like bums and seats or wallets and seats, we do this everywhere, right? We need an accountant. How many times have we heard? Or a lawyer. The sacred lawyer. Where is the heavenly sent lawyer who wants to be on every board out there, who can solve every problem? Who knows? Is there a lawyer in the room before I step on? But the example I often give is, so you have a lawyer, so you ask them to write your bylaws. And you're registered under this, as a society. These lawyers must know everything, right? So like get the lawyer to write our bylaws. And what I see when I look over bylaws is I can tell you almost right away if this was written by a lawyer or not. Because the lawyer ones tend to look like corporation documents and not like charitable documents, because trust law, which is where the Societies Act sits, is one course in your university degree as a lawyer. That's it. Whereas business law is a much bigger deal, and which do you think you actually work on in the real world? If you're working on the two, probably the business side, not trust law. There's very few lawyers in Alberta who specialize in trust law. Very, very few of them. I'll get a phone call and say, oh yeah, our lawyer helped us out and they know what they're doing. I'm like, oh, that's great. Can you give me their contact information? Because I've been looking for a lawyer who specializes in trust law. Because to my knowledge, there's only 3.5 of them. And I say 0.5 because one's retired. And the person's like, oh, well, maybe it's not ours. I'm like, okay, so can we talk about your bylaws differently? I'm not saying they're wrong, but let's have a conversation about them, right? The other piece about this is that we know that when you recruit people for a specialization, they're there for their skill set. They're not there for the organization's vision and values. They're there because I am the HR professional, I am the accountant. And they tend to focus on the area of their expertise, and they also tend to dominate the discussion. There's no point in us having a conversation about this. I'm an accountant, I know what I'm doing. And what boards need to do is they need to become comfortable paying for the expertise that they don't have sit on their boards. And they need to start paying the money for a consultation, because you will get farther and get more done by having great conversations at your board level and then paying for the 3 hours with a lawyer or an accountant to make sure that the conversation you had can be reality. But the minute you bring the expert into the room, they see it through their information lens. So you want to talk about the new road in your community and how you're going to change the road structure, and you brought in the engineer, and they see the world through their lens, not through also the lens of the urban planner, right? And so great, how many cars do we need to get out of this community in the morning during school time? This many, this is how we should make the road. But we're not talking about bike lanes or bus infrastructure or rapid transit or walkability or kids safety or e-scooters or all the other things we're talking about there. What does that look like? Do speed bumps actually work? No, right? I slow down before I hit it and I speed up afterwards, hopefully, if I care about my car. But that's the reality. Sadly, we know structures like that don't work. So we need to think differently. What expert did we bring into the community to have this consultation? Well, let's have our conversation first, because we hold the values of the community and our desires, and then go to the expert and say, all right, how do you make this a reality? That's the question on the table. And sorry, I'm not trying to bash engineers. I'm trying to use the comparison there, because I think it's important. This is how I was trained. This is the flow I need. So this applies for everything. We should not be recruiting board members for a specific piece, be it the wallets, be it the networks, be it meeting space, whatever. We should be recruiting them somewhere else and finding other ways to meet those needs. There's another piece to this. We have, when I go and find online, what makes a good board member? How many of these things show up on there? All of our board members, you shouldn't recruit somebody if they're not willing to sit on a committee. All board members should donate to the organization. They should show up to meetings prepared. Their children of themselves should be involved somehow in the organization. They should have emotional commitment. They are lawyers, accountants, HR professionals, or they bring some other skill set to our board. They're passionate about their mission. They share the same vision of the organization, and they have rich friends. So let's scratch a bunch of those out. Notice I scratched committees out. Just because I sit on a committee doesn't make me a good board member. Just because I don't have the time to sit on a committee doesn't make me a bad board member. I need to be recruiting board members for the right reason. And if I'm recruiting somebody who doesn't have the time but brings a different perspective, that might be the reason why I'm bringing them there. So I talked about the single mom, 2 kids, the university student, the person who's holding 3 jobs. They might not be able to do all the extra stuff we ask of our board members, but their perspective on a board might be just as important. So I don't want to trap anybody in that way. So the earlier question. So I know who I am, right? I understand what we stand for. Now I have to work with them. So how do I communicate this? How do I tell my community, my membership, who we are? It's a marketing question. I don't have a great answer for you today. That would take me another 3 hours. But it's something for you to think about. Rather than saying, we're this community, how do I actually say, this is what our community is working towards? Right? This is what we stand for. This is what the work we actually do, and this is what it looks like to be a board member here. And this is why we want you, and these are the kind of people we want. This is the difference you can make by being here. And this is why we think you want this role. Now it's about getting that out. What does that look like? I'm really hoping nobody's here from my community league, but I think I'm going to be wrong in a second. this is how I felt about that. So for a long time, my community league, you know, all of us do that. We have our regular newsletter that comes out and is in everybody's mailbox. And they would list all the board members and there'd be president, vacant. Are you interested in volunteering? We're looking for a president. Yeah, no. And I think it was vacant for a very long time. That's why when you told your story, I was like, I wonder if you live near me. Right? And it was like that for a very long time. But that doesn't entice me. It doesn't really give me a sense of what are the issues that you're trying to pull me in for, what you stand for, what the meetings are, what the work needs to be, who I need to be, why I should be there. So how do we change that? And I can't answer that because it's about your community and understanding your community. It's about understanding the values of your community, the demographics of your community, the language capabilities in English in your community. Should it be in English? That's an interesting one about, I think we saw that in a condo board in BC, where the condo board does its meetings in Mandarin, I believe it was, and that one of the condo members doesn't speak Mandarin, one of the few in that building, and so they were demanding that the meetings be done in English and the board refused. So what language are your meetings in is a question. What language should they be in? How can you make them accessible? How can you make them accessible to people who are hearing impaired or have other challenges? What does that look like? How do we bring those voices in? Those are all parts of that question. But they're also, how do we communicate to you that we want you? Your input is valuable to us. How do we represent you here? What's the difference you make? This is a big challenge that you need to think about. How do you tell your community that they should be there to make a difference? Not that you need them, but they want to be there. Boards need two things. They need the minutes to be recorded and kept, like the minutes to be recorded, and the finances to be done and tracked. And then they need people who hold a title to be able to be called to answer questions on those issues. Well, and the sign-off means that I've looked at them, right? But signing authority doesn't have to be your executive. Like, all of these things are things that we've made normal in a set of bylaws, not things that have to be the way they are. Does that statement make sense? And so, I hate taking minutes. Am I willing to hold the secretary title because I will say, yes, I've looked through these minutes and they're correct? And that somebody can call me from the CRA, from Service Alberta, from AGLC and say, your minutes look weird to me? Sure, I can do that, but don't you dare ask me to record them in a meeting. I'm not interested. Yeah, we can talk about that, but I'm here for other things, but I'll sign off on that. Is there a way for somebody else to take the minutes? And the answer is, unless you said they must, then yeah, you can hire a university student for $30 to come and take the minutes for your 2-hour meeting, right? Like, that's an option available to you. We don't think that way. And so when we talk about the treasurer role and the secretary role, we've put work on these roles that actually doesn't exist, that doesn't have to be there. The work needs to get done, and this person's accountable to ensure that the work was right, but they don't actually have to be the one who does it. And so by changing the conversation, we change the role a little bit. So treasurer's the same way. I don't have to do the books. I can hire somebody else to do the books. I'm the one who just looks over them and says, yes, they were done, and yes, I agree where they were done, and I'm gonna stamp off on them. Now, should I have some financial sense so I know I'm not being cheated? Sure, but I don't have to be an accountant anymore, right? And so we need to start thinking about boards differently because people don't wanna do these things anymore. I don't think people really ever wanted to do them. I think people did them because our societies were different, our homes were different, the amount we worked was different. We didn't have to have side hustles anymore. That kind of thing was changed then. So think of it this way, from the Societies Act perspective, there are 3 key signatures that need to stand. The secretary signs off saying, yes, these are the official records of the organization. I hold that signature, secretary and president. The treasurer's is, yes, these finances are the finances of the organization. That's what their signature stands for. And the president's signature is, yes, this was the decision in motions of the organization. And so it doesn't matter who's doing the work. And I hear the frustration. And to me, it's like, okay, we've delegated this, but the city's gonna go, yeah, but I can't hold them accountable. I only can hold the community league accountable, and it doesn't matter that you've delegated the work, your signature is the community league's decision and motion. And so that's what your signature is there for. It's not, yes, I've done the work, it's, yes, the community league stands behind this work. And so the comment about insurance is exactly that. It's like when I work with groups with executive directors, one of the things I often remind the executive director is, hey, when you start to work without a budget and when you start to work on your own without getting buy-in from the board, you're no longer really in the insurance of the organization. I want you to think about who you are, what that looks like, because then you know who you're looking for, and the marketing answer needs to be unique to you. How do you find them? How do you engage them? Think about your AGMs differently. That would be a good way to start. I don't know about you, but I find it really boring to go to a meeting where I just keep raising my hand to whatever the board puts out there and do nothing. And why does the AGM have to be that way? For example, the Societies Act says you have to have an AGM and certain things have to be presented at it. But nowhere in the Societies Act does it say your executive has to be elected at the AGM. Nowhere does it say that you actually have to get elected into a role. You could just be elected and the board can choose the roles based on their skill sets and availability, right? So I didn't get elected to president, I got elected on the board, and this year I'm the best person to be the president based on the situations that are going on and my availability. And if that changes, somebody else can take over for me next year who's on the board. Not the membership is forcing somebody to decide on somebody who might not be the right fit for it. We can have conversations about thinking differently to recruit the people we want, to find the people we want, to build the kind of organization and community we want going that way. We just need to step back and say, wait a second, is this a law? Is this a must? Do my bylaws force this? Do they have to force this? What should our board meetings actually look like for this community league? And then we get the people that are right for what we've created and we want to be.